I would like to introduce Pastor Dan Rift. He has flown in from Chicago, and so we very much appreciate that he has come all this way to share his message with us. He has served for 9 years as director of the ELCA World Hunger and Disaster Appeal. Prior to this, he served for 14 years in relief and development work with a focus on international sustainable development and on disaster response. He has also served congregations in Pittsburgh and Dallas, and when not working, which seems like he always is, it is likely that you will find him and his wife with at least one of their 3 grown daughters. So I would like to welcome him and again thank him for sharing his message with us this evening. Thank you.
Well, wonderful to be here. We'll see if technology is my friend today. I got a PowerPoint and a couple videos that I want to show, so we'll see if they go through. But I actually want to start with the beginning of the 6th chapter of the book of Acts. Interestingly, in the Revised Common Lectionary, this reading actually I don't believe ever comes up. So this is something we don't necessarily hear regularly, but listen to this word. Now, during those days, that's early in the church, as the church is starting to come together and multiply with the Spirit moving, in those days, when the disciples were increasing in number, the Hellenists complained against the Hebrews because their widows were being neglected in the daily distribution of food. And the 12 came together. The whole community of the disciples said, it's not right that we should neglect the word of God in order to wait on tables. Therefore, friends, select from among yourselves 7 men of good standing, full of spirit and of wisdom, who we may appoint to this task, while we, for our part, will devote ourselves to prayer and serving of the word. 7 people were selected, and with the laying on of hands, with the affirmation of the community, and that is now 2,000 years of work in responding to hunger in the world. And it's worth at least beginning kind of realizing, as this church venture was going on, the first group of people that were responded to were the Hellenist widows. So those are the Greeks that were being, by their ethnicity, by their identity, ignored in the distribution of the food. So for a long time, we've been doing work related to hunger that has to do with a whole overlay of why people are hungry. I also think that it's fascinating if you follow the trajectory of those 7, which were chosen specifically to deal with the food. And I do love this kind of thing where the disciples say, well, it's not right that we should neglect spreading the gospel in order to wait on tables, so let's get some other people here, which is a whole lot better than the disciples did when there were 5,000 people on the hillside, and they kind of missed this and said, well, they're hungry, let them go get some food. At least they now are saying, hey, this is our responsibility. If you follow the trajectory of those 7, though, you start to see that this is where the gospel goes out to the people who are not within the traditional Hebrew community. So as we go from Jerusalem to Judea to Samaria to the ends of the earth, the Samaria to the ends of the earth piece is really affected by these people who've been called to do work in hunger. My sense is that the work that we do in response to hunger, whether that be the work that you're doing locally or the way that we're knitting ourselves together to respond to hunger in some of the most difficult and needing places in the world and in this nation, the response to hunger isn't a specialized ministry of the church. It is core to our identity and who it is we are and what it is we do. So I want to really explore a couple things in this kind of venture about hunger tonight. One is, why is hunger important to the ministry of the church? After all, we could come together, we could worship, we can celebrate, and we could do nothing about hunger. Why is it important to the ministry of the church? That's the first. And then why is what we do in response to hunger somewhat different or significantly different than what the rest of the world is doing and these other organizations, even other organizations we might partner with. So those are the kind of two things that I think might be good to talk about. I'll try to, I know I can fill the hour and more, but I'll try not to do that, so if we have some questions, or I'll pause in the middle if we have some questions. So around the country, when I talk with ELCA World Hunger, and I've been in most synods at one point or another talking about it, I try to reference back to 1974, even though I talk about 2,000 years here, or I might talk about what happened related to hunger in the Reformation 500 years ago, because, Luther was upset about what was happening in the church, but part of why he was upset was that the economic order that was being imposed in his situation, partly by the church itself, were leaving people more hungry and poorer. And he said the same thing about the princes, and he said the same thing about the bankers in his time. So this idea of we're doing advocacy in the church on behalf of people who are hungry or on behalf of our community so that there are fewer people who are hungry and are in poverty kind of goes back 500 years. But 1974 is the year that we kind of anchor what we're doing these days. Because in 1974, there was a synod that came together. And I don't know if you remember in 1974, but 1974 was a year of the wheat crisis where there was the price of wheat had spiked because there was a failure of wheat in the Soviet Union. A lot of farmers in the U.S. were actually doing pretty well. There was concern for what is it that we could be doing as a church. And in 1974, there was a synod that got together and they said, we cannot allow ourselves to continue to do work as usual in the church. We need to make a special commitment to do something about hunger. We need to do it together. We need to do it as church, and we need to do it in a way that is going to make a significant change. And that synod committed that year to try and raise $500,000 and challenged the larger church to raise, $500,000 to raise $5 million. That was what happened. That church, the larger church, raised $12 million and started a venture to respond to hunger that continues on to ELCA World Hunger today. Now, this has never been just about money. It's always been about the vision of mission, of the difference that we can make in the world, of the ways that we live into our discipleship, of the ways that we work together, the way that we are making a difference, and making a difference that matters today but changes the trajectory for tomorrow. It's always been about that, but it also has been about money. So for a second, let me just tell you about next year will be 45 years since that synod took that action. And next year, we likely will have raised $600 million together, raised it up and put it to work, because money doesn't sit around for very long in this ministry. And on top of that, very quickly, there was a response to say we also need to do work about disaster. Part of what had spurred that on were the long-term problems that had existed in this area from Hurricane Agnes, from also in South Dakota from the flooding. And so we wanted to back up the local communities where disasters happen for local solutions to long-term problems from those disasters, and to involve people from around the church to support that work. If you add the disaster and the hunger work together, we will have raised and mobilized over $1 billion by next year. The synod that started that trouble was this synod, was Central Pennsylvania. From Central Pennsylvania came the vision that what we had been doing as business as usual was not what we needed to do in the future. And it set the course. So you are everything I tell you today is part of the legacy that you or your neighbors or your congregations got going. And so I guess God loves troublemakers. What can I say? I want to run through. I think, actually, let me also say, I personally feel this sense of weight of how important the hunger work is in the church. I feel it because my father was a refugee to this country. He grew up as a hungry in his youth. His first words were marmalade to, I want sugar, I want marmalade, I want, my mother's father and my great-grandfather on my mother's side, and his two brothers went to Iowa, started the first German evangelical church of Hubbard, Iowa. They sent him off to seminary because there wasn't enough food on the farm. And he was either the worst farmer or the smartest kid. I'll go with the smartest kid. And then World War I broke out. He didn't end up going to seminary. It took a couple generations till we got there. But, God works in God's own time. And so it's a personal matter. But also, by the time I came along, I didn't grow up in the church. And I was invited to upstate New York to go on a church hayride by a young woman. And let me tell you, when you're a senior high school and a young woman invites you to go on a hayride in upstate New York, there's one answer to that, yes. And unfortunately, she really wasn't interested in me. She thought that the church would be a great place for me. She thought I was missing stuff in my life, and the church would be that place, would create that place. And it really was true. I'd never heard the Lord's Prayer before. I'd never heard the Apostles' Creed. I hadn't opened up the Bible before in my life. So that worship life, that biblical life, that fellowship of the way people treated one another. But if that church, there was flooding in upstate New York that year, if that church had not been responding to the flooding, and if it had not been doing something about hunger, especially given my family background, it wouldn't have had the integrity. So my sense is this is critical to the church because it's who we are. We can go back to Matthew 25. We can go back to a number of places in Scripture and feel ourselves convicted by that. But I'd rather go back to Scripture and be inspired by the examples that were set by the seven, by the ways in which it's made a difference in the world, by the ways that people have put their own selves on the line, and by the authenticity of faith. In our day, where it is so easy just not to go to church, to be able to have a practical thing that we're doing to make a difference is, I think, a really effective witness. So I want to thank you for the ways that you're doing that as a congregation here locally. You are the front line of the ELCA in this community and in this area of Pennsylvania to respond to hunger. You are doing that in your direct service. You're doing that, for example, with the advocacy work, the work of LAMPA, which is supported also to some by your commitment to hunger. You're doing that locally, but you're knitting it together with other people in other churches around this country. And that's really what I want to tell you about, is maybe where we're different. What kind of a difference do we make? There are many organizations now that respond to hunger. I would imagine if we stopped and started making a list, we could easily fill up a sheet of organizations that we know of that's responding to hunger. Why is our response, the response that you're creating by your commitment, the response that you're asking for God to guide by your prayers, how is it different from what other people are doing? So I don't know if you can see this, but these are the countries where ELCA World Hunger is doing work, did work last year. The blue countries are the areas of greatest growth, and I want to tell you about two of them. Part of the reason is because we've been growing as a program. Part of the reason we've been growing is because of the generosity that you and others have made. And part of that is because ELCA World Hunger, which has been going now for almost 45 years, is part of this 5-year campaign for the ELCA, the Always Being Made New campaign. And that's part of the commitment that you as a congregation have been talking about as part of your capital campaign. So the blue countries, I guess there are areas in the United States as well, are particularly the areas where we have had new initiatives of growth, and I'm going to talk about two of them. Both of them in Africa, one of them Malawi, and one of them South Sudan. So Malawi is the little sliver country that's about a third of the way up from the south of Africa. You can see it here. No. You can see here, it's a landlocked country on Lake Victoria. So for anybody to get supplies to Malawi, they have to actually go through another country, which makes it one of the poorest nations in Africa, one of the most food insecure nations in Africa. It's typically one of the 20 poorest in the world, and it's one of the places where we have a companion church, the Evangelical Lutheran Church in Malawi. All the projects I'm going to tell you about are on a 50-mile radius down one road in Malawi, one of the main roads in Malawi. The Lutherans are known as the people to go to if your community is having problems with food, even if you don't have a Lutheran church. We're just known as the people who know how to do agriculture. And so this first one is a program where there was not enough fresh vegetables in the community and not enough vitamins and minerals, and so they started a community garden. Now, the community garden was land that was set aside by the community, but it needed water. Now, because we're yoked together with these big churches in Europe as well that can get government money, Swedish Church Aid was able to get money through the Church of Sweden, and they were able to actually put in solar panels. We helped with the pump and the storage unit, and then this is all self-managed. So first, the community had to get together. They had to decide on what the price would be to be able to use the water. They decided it would be less if it was for your own family consumption than if you took your goods to market. There needed to be people trained. The reason to charge the money is so that you could gather up enough supplies and enough money to do the repairs. So when those solar panels go out in 20 years, there's going to be enough money to be able to actually do that work. What's interesting is the community keeps that money. There are 3 people who have to be involved in any release of that money. And I don't think there's a picture here, but a lot of the savings clubs and things in Africa have boxes that have 3 locks on it. And if you go and look at the first community chest that came in Luther's time as the alternative to the box for indulgences, it's a it's a box that has 3 locks in it. I mean, so some of this is, hey, the more things change, the more they stay the same. Just down the road, there was a place where there wasn't enough protein in the diet and that there weren't opportunities. This is a place where a woman came to me and she didn't speak English, but it was very easy to tell what she was telling me, that this area where she was showing me this kind of round area where corn was stored was where she used to live. And then she showed me her new house that were baked bricks, very small room. She, a widow, and her widowed sister live in this room. But the difference between the tin-roofed baked brick house and the sun-baked brick straw place was because she started keeping goats. Goats in Malawi tend to be fairly scrawny. There's not enough water there for them to be milking goats. They're meat goats. And the church in Malawi got together with the church in South Africa and did a crossbreeding of goats. It actually took us 2 rounds. So the first one was a failure, which is a reality. This is risky work. But the second time it took, and so there's about 2.5 times the amount of meat on these Lutheran goats, these super goats of Malawi. Which makes all the difference in the world, in market and other places. One of the big problems in Malawi are the seasons of hunger. This is the best way that I have to describe extreme food insecurity, or seasons of hunger, and particularly the children are affected by seasons of hunger. This is when there's not enough food after the harvest to get through the next cycle to the next year of the next harvest. And often what will happen is a community will come to the church and say, to the national church, and say, we don't have enough food. Do you have food you can share with us? What the Evangelical Lutheran Church of Malawi does is they say, we will share food with you, but we're also going to send in agriculturalists. And we will share enough food so that you can get through the next harvest and planting to the next harvest. But you have to set aside some land that's community land and commitment to work that land. And that will be the food that's available for people who cannot feed themselves after the next harvest, and it will be stored. But of course, then everybody's given up a little bit of their land to be able to create that land. So they send in agriculturalists to increase the yield so that people have their same amount or more from their own family farms. The reason I think this is really important, do you get the idea of what I'm saying here? This is like, we're going to help you feed your kids, but next year you need to be able to feed your kids. This is the long-term solution of the community coming together. And we don't organize that. Well, first of all, we don't organize it from the United States at all. It's organized in Malawi by the church that's in Malawi. But even the church in Malawi doesn't organize that. They resource it. The community has to organize it. Because we know that if somebody is doing it for a community, then it's that person or that organization's solution. But if a community is doing it for self, resourced by others, then it's the community's solution, and then it will stay. This is my favorite one in this set of projects in Malawi. And I just chose one country that I had stories and experience in, but there's 60 countries that we work in. So, this gets repeated in unique ways in other countries. This was, in this community, what happened was there wasn't enough food production or work, and the men in the community had to go down to the border areas in the south of Malawi to offload the trucks that were coming up from Zimbabwe and put them onto Malawian trucks. See, at the borders, the trucks can't go across, so you have to move the goods, and you move them by hand. Well, there's a real problem that exists in the world, and let's just be, really clear about this. When a bunch of men are together in truck stops over and over again, it is terrible. It tears apart the family. It creates difficulty because all the resources are then with the men and not in the community, and it's a spread of disease. I mean, let's be clear. This is part of what goes on in many, many places. It's a spread of disease. And so this community said, how can our men come back and stay in our community? And this is a kind of a unique program that's now become a model, which is small plots of land for which then there's a dug pond. And so there's a fish pond, and then you'll see behind it there's corn growing. Actually, they can do 2 rotations in this area. And then there are mango trees around the corn, and then there's beehives in the mango trees, which then gives you a source of protein and ready income in the fish. It gives you a staple, the corn. It gives you minerals and vitamins through the mangoes, and it gives you, again, cash crop in the honey, and the bees are pollinating the crops. I mean, and so it's a really just model solution. And actually, it was called the model solution by Time magazine. And then this is the bee, the honeycomb, and this beehives. Not everybody had a family structure that would be able to have afforded or to have taken responsibility for a plot. So part of the responsibility is the people who had the opportunity here also brought food forward. Now, one of the things that I think is just fascinating, because we have institutionalized and depersonalized things very much into small little envelopes that we write a name on and make sure that nobody else sees, and we call it our offerings or our tithes. In Africa, what happens is when the harvest comes in, people carry in their bags of grain to the front of the church, and they pile them up. The neighboring country south of Malawi is Zimbabwe. And when there was a major economic crisis in Zimbabwe, people ended up eating their seed corn. Have you ever heard that expression? To eat your seed corn means you eat the seed that you were going to plant the next year. And so therefore, it meant devastation for the whole next year, a cycle of crops. So we had happened that year to get a special gift in a bequest that mobilized $1 million that we were able to put into Zimbabwe for work of agriculturalists, for seed and better seed stock that had been there before, and to keep the nurses in the nursing school and to send in medicine to the hospitals, because we also do health-related work there. And so at the end of that year, without expectation, people came forward and they said, we need to start a seed bank so this will never happen again, and put it in the hands of the church, and we need to tithe our crops. And it was a natural action. And it was, for me, the first place where I realized we need to do more than make sure that people have enough for themselves. There's something in our human makeup that says, when I have enough for myself, I need to be able to help my neighbors. It's partly why if you get chickens or if you get goats, the expectation is not just that you're going to raise those chickens or raise those goats, but you're going to share the offspring with your neighbors. And that moves people from a way of surviving to a way of being knit together as a community, of caring for one another and being empowered to help their neighbors. Because that's what you're invited into in the invitation to support ELCA World Hunger, or the ways that you're responding in hunger locally, or the many, many, many ministries that are going on through Trinity. You're invited to take the blessings of your life and turn it around to blessings for others. You're invited to see yourself not just as the person who's able to make life work for yourself, but to live with a purpose. And I think that's part of the privilege of being able to do this as church. We start with that understanding, we demonstrate it, and then people have an opportunity to practice it. And I think this is really an important part of who we are. So earlier this year, we did the youth gathering. And there was a part of the youth gathering which was called the Global Farm Challenge, which was a way to bring attention to the church of this kind of ways that we do sustainable agricultural development and the challenges before smallholder farmers around the world. Just the kind of stuff that we've talked about in Malawi. We had a group of 9 families who together pooled $515,000 to challenge the church, the youth of the church, to challenge the church to raise an equal amount. And they've now raised over $750,000 in this Global Farm Challenge. So we really like to talk, thank you. And it's coffee, it's not water. So we have a significant commitment to the agricultural development that's going on around the world. And I think actually because of our history in this country of being farmers and in rural communities in particular, we really understand this challenge to rural communities. It's pretty easy to run a program where you're trying to mobilize things where there are blacktop roads or even where there are gravel roads. But it becomes a lot harder when it's dirt roads or in places where there are no roads at all. And that's where only the church is found. And so it's another mark of who we are. But it also is the place where it's really critical that somebody's doing something about agricultural work. So that's a mark of what it is that is a priority and a difference of the way that the church goes about it. I want to lift up a second example in this video, and that's about the south of Sudan. So the south of Sudan is kind of the blue block that's further up in Africa. The south of Sudan is a country that was formed from the Republic of Sudan after 30 years of civil war. So 30 years of civil war, a country is formed, and then the two major groups, people groups within that, the Nuer and the Dinka, started fighting each other because they were united as long as there was a common enemy. Well, interestingly, many years ago, there were young men sent out from Sudan to flee into the bush because they were escaping those people who were coming in to wipe out everybody in their villages. And these have been called the Lost Boys of Sudan. I don't know if you've heard the Lost Boys of Sudan. They were sent off to Ethiopia. Usually they went to Ethiopia. They often went to refugee camps in Ethiopia and then were transferred to camps in Kenya. Those camps are run by Lutherans. I mean, they're under the auspices of the UN, but they're run by Lutherans. So you are helping to run the largest refugee camp in the world. You're helping to run the camp that the Kingdom of Jordan chose the Lutherans to run the camp where all the Syrians are. We're not putting much money into that because there's a lot of international money into that, but we are putting identity into that. Well, some of those boys began growing up in this camp that says Lutheran World Federation on it. You can't walk into the camp without seeing the word Lutheran. And then the U.S. decided that it would take a certain number of refugees into the United States that were Sudanese, from Kenya, from the Kakuma camp in Kenya. And they came to this country, and they were resettled by an organization that had the word Lutheran on it, Lutheran Immigration and Refugee Services. And again, both of those having support from ELCA World Hunger. And two of them, in particular, became rostered leaders of the ELCA. one Nuer and one Dinka, and they said, if we can get along in this country, is that my time? I got to finish up by it? I hope not. Then why can't that happen in our own country? And so, crazy vision, start a reconciliation center, a ministry center in Juba, in the reconciliation area in the south of Sudan. And the vision of this center is that it would be a place where people could come that would be safe for Nuer and Dinka to come together, to be in church together. There is a church started with that, but in schools and particularly in training and skills that that folks can be employable, and in a specialized clinic, particularly for women. Now, the specialized clinic for women is doing the kind of surgery that you might have read about last week by the new physician from the Congo that just got the Nobel Peace Prize. It is for women who have experienced the violence in war. And Mark Jacobson, who is one of our mission personnel that has been in Tanzania, has helped to set this clinic up. The support for this building, this reconciliation center, has been through the global church sponsorship work. You'll hear more about that from my colleague Andrew next week, and from ELCA World Hunger. And the ongoing health and training program is from ELCA World Hunger, from the gifts that you are providing to ELCA World Hunger. I want you to just see this video here quickly.
This is a place where the need is absolutely incredible. One of the poorest countries in the world, one of the lowest levels of health care available, and this center, based in the referendum area, a population of up to 400,000 people who have no official clinic available to them. Here we are putting up a holistic system to help support the people around us.
You come at the right time because our situation cannot settle, but the love that you are given to us show us that we are all Christians and we have a love of brothers and sisters. As they say that the brother who comes to you in a hard time is a brother that loves you.
Having a community center and a clinic at the same place is of a very positive impact on the community around. I think we have to work together to improve the economic status of our community, because when the health services are there and people are healthy, people can be productive. So it is going to work as a holistic facility.
I think this center means a lot to the life of our community who is here, but I don't think it will serve this community alone. It's going to serve everybody around Juba and even outside Juba. As small as it is going to have a great magnitude in terms of impact. I feel like my daughter has a place to go to if she needs that services.
My real hope for this center is that it can be a place of light and compassion in an otherwise very challenging environment, and a place of refuge, and that we've been able to incorporate into the structure of this place with worship, training, and healthcare, all within this compound and facing one another as we serve the people of Juba.
Let me see if I can tell you how profound what you just saw is. The south of Sudan is called one of the most difficult places to work, one of the hardest places to live. People are just not investing in the south of Sudan. To put up a building is one thing. Mark Jacobson was recognized by the American Medical Association about 5 years ago as one of the heroes of medical work internationally, the quality of work that he's enabled to happen in Tanzania and the training that he's done. The physicians that are being trained there are being trained by the best of the best. Folks from Kenya have come in to work with children that are in crisis because they've been working with children in crisis that have been displaced from Sudan and from Somalia and from other countries, from Chad. They are the best of the best that there is in the world. We're sending in, we have trainers who have come into that area to help in economic development that are coming in from Tanzania and from Kenya and from Ethiopia, because they know how to work within the system, the economy of the place. They're the best of the best. Do we stand in contrast to the rest of the world that is saying, how in the world would we ever invest in there? And we are investing the best of the best. That's the difference, I think, in the practicality where what we do is just so profoundly different than what might be the choices and the selections that might be made by others. I want to say that first because it's powerful. I mean, I have walked with this journey for South Sudan for 35 years, through the civil war and through the difficulties. It's just the ability to stay with this from the day where boys are sent out to flee to save their lives to the point where they can come into ministry and have vision for reconciliation is the power of what you've made possible, because year in and year out, you have been supportive of this work. The work itself is phenomenal. The fragile part of it is whether the church cares about it, is committed to it, is willing to give to it. And that's partly what this campaign is about, is how are we going to shape this into the future. I want to play a different video now, because when the vision came to have ELCA World Hunger and started to take shape in the church, we're really, really good at a great idea, and then we actually have to implement it. That's where it's really fun in the church. Well, there was really a lot of common understanding of what it is that we should be about, and that the lead for the work that's going on in the United States is you. But that doesn't mean that we don't have common life and commitment to do that work together for a portion of what comes to ELCA World Hunger staying in the United States. And then the lead for what's going on internationally tends to be what we do together, but we also know that there's ways that you are committed to doing that in very particular ways. On the U.S. side, about 30% of what comes to ELCA World Hunger stays in the United States. One component of that is the advocacy work we talked about, but a lot of it is also grants into communities. Now, I have no doubt that if Trinity decides that they want to do something new to address hunger here, that within a matter of a very short time, you would have the resources to be able to do that. But that's not true for all churches, and it's not true everywhere, and it's not true for all the initiatives. So I want to show you a video of an initiative again, of being church in the midst of hunger. There's a place called Cathedral in the Night that's in Massachusetts, and this is the story of one person who's there. This is, although she doesn't say it in the video, she's a woman who you'll hear her talk about when she first came to the church. She was without home, without a place to live, with young children. And I just want you to hear a little bit of the difference that this community has made for her.
I was dragged here by my friend, who I was at a time in my life when I couldn't even say the word God. It left a bad taste on my mouth. And she's like, no, come, this is a different kind of church. You're really going to like it. And it was February. It was freezing. And I had an infant. Within a couple of months, I was completely in love with it. And in April of that year, I had my son baptized. And all of a sudden, I had this new connection with God. We can be messy here. we can, cry or shake or scream or, it's on the street corner. So, sky's the limit. I'm totally in love with the fact that it's social justice infused, which was a new word for me. Like, I didn't really understand what it was, but even in the last prayer before supper, it says hunger for justice for those who are fed.
Rebecca regularly comes with her 2 kids and is so gracious to help serve. What Rebecca really does well is connect people. So she helps people really build a lot of relationships as well as connect them to the services. She's been through the system and been through a lot of different things, and it's important to her to help other people.
These people have a real need, and they're really smart, and they're really in tune, and they're filled with all these gifts of knowledge and experience, a richness of life. You hear these people being told that, they're useless, but really they're a wealth of information, and I found God there. And I found him in me, that even when I was totally broken, all of a sudden God was in me, and that was the most healing thing I found here.
Okay, I was supposed to tell you because my colleagues are perfectionists that this is actually still a rough cut. You're the first group in public that's seen this story and this video. So, and they wanted to fix something. I don't know. I couldn't see anything that was wrong with it. So, so I just want to give you a sense of kind of what we're trying to do as church in the midst of this kind of a situation of hunger that is uniquely ours to do. The work that's supported here for Cathedral in the Night is done by individuals, by congregations, through synods, by the way that we support church development, but also it is a dinner church that's on the street. And so ELCA World Hunger is part of that support network for those churches of homeless people or people who are in transition. I want to stop there, and then I want to turn to disaster response. So let me just stop there. Did you get a sense of, what did you find exciting about the way that we're approaching hunger in the work that you saw? Did you get a sense of theme of any of that?
The old saying was, give a man a fish and you fed him for a day. Teach a man to fish and you feed him for a lifetime. And I think that's what this seems to be all about, is you're not just handing them food which is going to be gone as soon as they eat it. You're giving them a way to continue to produce and to share.
Right. Could you hear that? That this is the give a man a fish and he'll eat for the day, teach a man to fish and he'll eat for a lifetime. There are some other challenges, like if he can't have access to the water or if it's polluted or things like that, that also become part of that solution. I think that's exactly the sustainability, the caring about it, but it's more than that. And how does that person then help other people to learn how to fish and to spread that within a community? So I think it's that kind of element of the solutions are within the hands of the community that's there. They are the heroes of this story. We are the servants. And we can bring wisdom from other places that have faced, or connect them with people from other places where there are solutions for similar problems. But it's ultimately with them. And I think it affirms what we really do believe, that across all of humanity, God has bestowed us with all that we need. Now, how do we make that work? Because it's not in some places. Were people surprised to see the health-related work connected to hunger? So that's an important piece for us. Hunger and health go hand in hand. I should say, so it's interesting because I talked with Bishop McCarney, who was the bishop when Central PA Synod started the hunger program. He said that statistics at the time said 1 in 7 people were subject to extreme food insecurity. When I look back at the time, the UN talks about it as being 1 in 4 that face that extreme food insecurity. Although I have to tell you, can I say his age? I'm looking at, yeah. So he's 97, and I am sure that he is right about the numbers that he was quoting in 1974. There is no question in my mind that those were the numbers that he had before him in 1974, which is really great. So either way, but let's say 1 in 4 face a season of hunger. So do you know what it is now? It's 1 in 10. We're making progress. I mean, we are making progress. And the places that you saw here are some of the most difficult places to do that. And I can show you places in South America. I can show you places in in Asia. The work that we've been doing in Cambodia is astounding to me. And I've been doing this for over 3 decades. And I just continue to be astounded by the quality and the possibilities of work that are opening up and around the world. So I just want to thank you for standing with that. I want to say a couple things about disaster response, and partly because, our friends in Florida are facing category, I don't know if it's back up to a 4 now. Yeah, hurricane. I just want you to know so I've been here, but there's all the communication has happened with the people who are in Florida, both with the Florida Bahamas Synod and the congregations in that area, as well with the Lutheran Social Services. Those are our main actors in places where disasters happen in the United States. If you have an email listed with the ELCA, you will see in your inbox a notification about the work that we're prepared to do in Florida. So we are very careful about trying not to overburden that, but the church has given Lutheran disaster response the practically one of the only places where we have the ability to actually send out notification to all emails that are within the record of individuals that are known to the ELCA. So we really are serious about, first of all, not overusing it, but secondly, of hanging together in these times of disasters. So, and if you don't get something within the next 24 hours or so from us, it means we don't have your email. And if you'd like to, you can go and sign up. You can join Lutheran Disaster Responses through your Facebook page, which I really encourage you to do because we get great situation reports that are done through Facebook. So last year, there were these series, particularly 3 hurricanes that hit across the Caribbean and then Florida, Georgia, Texas, Louisiana, principally. And so it really became a huge effort. The picture up here is of, with the box, is actually supply kits that were being distributed in Puerto Rico. So we had much more relief work done. Now, in Puerto Rico, the camp that was there has been turned into a volunteer center, coordinated along with the Presbyterian Church with also another camp in a volunteer center to be doing longer-term rebuilding. There is also that work in the Virgin Islands, work going on in Texas for volunteers. So the long-term commitment is there. You mobilized together as a church about $15 million for the hurricanes, plus additional $3 million for general disaster response, larger than what we would have expected last year. We took actually, we have a spending plan now, not only for that $15 million, but also $1 million from general disaster. So everything that you gave for the hurricanes is either spent on or is allocated for or assigned for specific work in these hurricanes, which meant that when there were more hurricanes that came this year, we weren't taking last year's money. We were encouraging people to continue to give. And that's the 100% kind of commitment that we have in terms of disaster response. But I think it also means that we've been planning for how to do not only the immediate relief, but the longer-term rebuilding. And we've had actually an equal amount, almost, we either have had or expect to have another $15 million that is going to be given to us through FEMA for work through the Lutheran social service agencies in those areas, which means every dollar that we got given through the church or through the individuals that care about this ministry got doubled by this FEMA money because of the quality of the work that we do and the fact that we work with families. So I just want you to kind of get a sense of we're not just kind of hanging out here and just figuring it out as we go along. There really is a plan, and it's respected in a really important way. So I think I have the control for moving us forward. Sorry. So when I put this together, the last thing was this earthquake and tsunami that was in Indonesia. So why should we care about Indonesia? It's like halfway around the world, right? 20% of the folks who are in Central Sulawesi, where this occurred, where this terrible tsunami hit, are Protestant, and the largest Protestant group is Lutheran. There are actually more Lutherans in Indonesia than there are in North America. So this is us. We're positioned. The programs that were done after the big tsunami, almost 15 years ago, are programs that are still vitally important in this kind of response as well. And what had been put together at that time still has a lot of power to be helping in these communities. And so this is an example. Some people have sent us money specifically for this, but also it's an example why the general gifts for disaster response are so important, because it helps us to respond in places where folks don't necessarily respond. And that was really the last disaster that I had to show you. But, of course, now we're waiting for the next hurricane, which is coming in on Florida. I think it's important for the people in Florida to know that you are standing with them. I mean, they know that the church is standing with them, but they also, because they're part of this, they know that that is individuals and individual congregations. And so I think that's part of the power of our being a church working together. I really am, this is a great congregation. You have a lot of ability to focus in on a lot of things. And I'm really glad that there are people who are so motivated to help in the work that we're doing with disaster response and in working against hunger in the world. The persistence that we have in this and the depth of commitment, and I think the wisdom that we've gained over the years, is really the power that we have in making a difference in the world. But it takes us participating in that. And so I want to thank you for that. I know you are wrapping in the support for some of this work into the campaign that you have as a congregation. And so that's very exciting, because as you look into your own future, you're also seeing a future that is beyond your own footprint. And that's really, really faithful. So thank you for that. I don't know, where are we? About 10 minutes of questions, and then folks are on their way. Mm-hmm. You said 1 in 10 for hunger. Yes. That would be worldwide. And that is what we call, that is extreme food insecurity, which means people who are facing a season of hunger. In the United States, there are very few of those, 1 in 10. So the hunger, the shape of hunger in the U.S. is a bit different. But in general, it's the kind of hunger that would leave children stunted, that will affect their trajectory in life, their ability for them to grow or to learn if it's not addressed. So that kind of level of hunger. Is that helpful? In the U.S., hunger tends to be episodic of getting through the month. I have to choose to either buy food or rent, pay my medical bills or buy food, things like that, get my medicine or buy food. Those kind of tough choices that families have to make or individuals have to make. And the church, the work that you support here is just critical to that, to helping people to make it past those days in the course of a month.
What would be some of the regions of the 1 in 10?
The worst, the areas that are most. Yeah. So you heard two of them. Malawi has a high rate of infant malnutrition or child malnutrition. Sudan was one of 4 countries that was named last year as being in a situation of famine. Yemen is another one. Areas of Nigeria are another one. Areas that there's conflict going on or people are being dislocated is by far the biggest factor now. So issues of being able to deliver relief material or agricultural advancement is really done. If the world were at peace, we could turn this thing around. So these are the areas that are the violence against people of certain ethnic groups are really an element of that. And so we go back to this passage about the Hellenist widows, that's not new. It's not new. So those are the areas that are worst. There are some areas in, there are some areas that agricultural failure is happening because of the change that's going on in climate. I know we can talk about why, we can disagree on why there's climate change, but you can't disagree that the climate has changed, which means you can't disagree that some of the traditional ways of farming don't work. And that's the other kind of big factor is people who have traditional farming practices that have never changed generation after generation, all of a sudden they're not getting a crop, their crop's not coming in, they're not getting the yield. And so that's the other most prevalent factor, and that does tend to be around the equator. So that's, the most prevalent place. Yeah. Sure.
What percentage of the donation goes to administrative costs?
Sure. So when it varies about kind of how you give, but it's not worth playing the game. I mean, so in general, in the general population, about 28% goes of if you give a charitable dollar for relief and development, about 28 cents, or about 72 cents on the dollar goes in general. For us, it's between 85 and 90 cents of the dollar goes to that work for general hunger. And in disaster response, it's a little bit less than that for general disaster response. And if you're giving to a particular disaster, it's 100% goes to the work. We don't hire extra staff in Chicago. We don't do any of that. It all goes. We cover the cost of receiving and administration of those funds from other funds, principally disaster and hunger, but some from general mission. And that's where I need to say the other thing, though, in efficiency is two other things we're saying. One, the most important gift that you give in your life now is what you give to this congregation in the way that it supports the whole network of mission that we do. What you do here at Trinity, what happens at the Synod, what happens through the big church, the church-wide expression of what we do. There would be no ELCA World Hunger if there wasn't an ELCA. Doesn't mean that we're taking that money and focusing it on hunger. I think this is the extra piece that comes along. This is the second mile. But that piece is very important. So we're not ending up paying for a lot of things to just exist. And that's one. And the second is because we're connected into these communities, we're not having to spend a lot of that stuff that would be considered to be program money to be able to set up a program in a country. That's not considered administration, overhead, or fundraising. That's just considered to be the cost of program. So we pay a whole lot less for program services and a whole lot more for the programmatic work or the food or the seeds or things along those lines. And that's the other place where, I'm just really proud. I mean, you could tell I'm excited about the fact that I want you to know that your money is really well invested when you do this work.
When seeds are purchased, I was curious if you use seeds that will reproduce time and time again, or do they have to be bought new every year?
Yeah, it varies from country to country because we don't tend to send in things from international. We tend to get it off the market in the place. We definitely have a bias towards seed banks that allow for reproduction of seeds and not the seeds that can't be reused. But they're different. I mean, it varies from country to country, and it depends on the marketplace. And the same thing is true for food. We rarely actually have to seek the food that's sent in. If it is, it's usually through the larger distribution system of Lutheran World Federation into the refugee camps. But in general, for families, in most places in the world, even when there's, like in south of Sudan, where there's been a famine going on, there's plenty of food in the marketplace. It's that the people have had to leave their land and are displaced and don't have any money. So if we can work on people being able to have money, they actually can have food. So I think this food distribution piece is secondary to the problem. The same thing for seeds, though. We try not to actually ship things in. And we don't do our own shipping. We don't have our own shipping. That's partly why Lutheran World Relief is such an important partner for us. They do material aid for things like blankets and so on. And while some of the other cooperative work we have with church agencies out of Europe and Lutheran World Federation. I hope that's helpful. It's a big issue about what seeds are available around the world and who owns them, so to speak. Yeah.
Say a word about the connection between ELCA and the Bread of the World.
Yeah. So one of the things that we have a commitment to is advocacy. So in your state, do people know you? Do you want to introduce yourself?
Tracy DePasquale, Lutheran Advocacy Ministry in Pennsylvania. We're the ELCA State Public Policy Office as part of the ELCA's overall advocacy network, and we equip you as disciples to speak up in the public square, to bring your faith to the table, to strive for justice and peace in all the earth. So.
Yeah, we also speak as Lutherans in our in our nation's capital, and that includes from time to time leaning on the bishops from different synods to go and represent the church. And I have to say it's very, very effective, because I've seen, I really encourage you, if you ever have a chance, just to go to your elected representative's office in Washington. Go to the local office, but go to their office in Washington and look around and see what's happening around you with organizations, or who do you get to see if you go there. Just find something you'd like to talk about, and if it could be something about the effective work of the support for the Farm Bill, or for the hunger-related work, or after-school programs related to hunger, then that's all the better. But, go do that to become an informed and active citizen. And you'll notice that you get to speak with a staff person, maybe actually in a room, maybe sometimes in the hallway. But when a bishop shows up, they tend to get into the elected officials, and they tend to be able to have a longer conversation that goes deeper quicker. That's our good thing. But to speak as one part of this, really dynamic Christian presence in this country, and presence of working with people of other faiths, is only one voice. And so Bread for the World forms that ecumenical, that Christian voice together, that's not just Lutheran, but with others. And so this is a multi-pronged kind of approach to get the voice out there. And the Bread for the World stuff this year is on the Farm Bill, and it's exactly what we're hoping will happen with the Farm Bill and with other legislation. So is that helpful? So look at the stuff. I love that the kids have said, hey, kids should be able to eat. Here's something that we put on a plate. So I love your plates that are out there. Thanks. I really appreciate it. If you have other questions, I just live to answer them. So thank you.